Well, hello, everybody. I'm Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. Yesterday, I published my 2023 NFL draft grades for the AFC teams, so today we are going to go through the NFC teams. Now, I do apologize for my last few videos being very lengthy. I promise they will be cut down once we get into my next series. You guys will see what's coming up here. But other than that, I don't want to keep you guys here for too much longer, so we are just going to get right in here with the top 16 NFC teams. We go from 16 to 1. So let's get started here with the team that a lot of people have in last place in the NFL, and that's the Detroit Lions. So I don't agree that they're last in the NFL. They are very close, so I do have them dead last in the NFC. But they do stray away from getting that last place thing. If you do want to go watch my AFC grades video before this, I do kind of explain more about it. But I do have the Jets in last place. Lions still come in second to last, though, across the entire NFL. And it stems from how their top heavy picks were very lackluster. Jahmyr Gibbs is where it started. He is 21st on my big board, and he did go 12th. So that's not bad in itself. Plus, he's the best running back on the board. But I mocked a running back to these guys in the third round, not the first round. I literally said Tyjae Spears to the Lions in the third round, and DeAndre Swift gets replaced. They end up replacing him with Jahmyr Gibbs. They have bigger needs in this team. They addressed linebacker later. They addressed tight end later. They addressed D-line later. But they really were not great with addressing those needs. They needed corner too, and they didn't take a single cornerback in this entire draft. So that's kind of a big contributor to that C- grade. And Jahmyr Gibbs is just not the first pick that you need. And even Jack Campbell at 18, he was the second best linebacker on the board, 26th overall. And Campbell again, good pick in terms of where he was on the big board, but you had bigger needs. You had D-line, you had DB. And Campbell was a bit of a reach, but both Gibbs and Campbell weren't terrible selections, but they weren't good selections either. It does kind of get pretty bad, though. It's Sam Laporta at pick number 34. He's 69th on my big board, fourth best tight end on the board up to this point. And I thought Laporta was going to end up going under the radar for tight ends this year. I thought Musgrave was for sure going to go higher, and I thought I was bold for going with Laporta at number 5. Apparently not. He was the second tight end taken, the first one being, what's his face? Oh, he was at number 3. I don't want to keep running on. So Laporta, I thought he was going to go under the radar, and your new tight end 1 got massively reached for at pick 34. I thought he was a early to mid third round talent, and he ends up going in the early second round. So that's something I just did not agree with, and I just remember Dalton Kincaid was the first tight end taken, and that was a good pick for Buffalo, but I talked about that in my AFC video. And then you finally get a really home run pick here with Brian Branch. He is 24th on my big board, the number 1 safety in this class. He was the first safety taken, but you had 3 reaches followed by a big steal. Just the pure inconsistency of this draft class just started here. But you get another good pick following with Hendon Hooker. I was not liking the fact that I saw a lot of mocks having the Lions go with QB at 6, like Will Levis at number 6 would have been the possibly the option for these guys. I didn't agree with that at all. I thought backup QB was the way to go and not starter, since I did like what Jared Goff did last year. Nonetheless, Hendon Hooker is good. 77th on my big board, goes at 68, best QB on the board. And a backup QB is a pretty nice position to take your backup QB at pick 68. And then you have 2 F selections. Broderick Martin, when I saw this, I reacted to this live. I was in complete shock. Broderick Martin's not on my big board, undrafted talent, and he was an absolute reach. D-line depth wasn't as important as your starting D-line, unless you expect Broderick Martin to be a starter, in which that would be pretty bad having an undrafted talent starting as your new DT, or one of your inside DTs. And then Colby Sorsdahl also was not on my big board, and he had undrafted talent. Lions, they just needed to avoid offensive line. I thought going into this draft, it was just solidified who they were going with at tackle and guard and center. And now they have your number 5 offensive tackle, and it comes in the 5th round. That's not someone you want to pick in the 5th round. But then you get really good value on the board in round 7 with Antoine Green out of UNC. 176th on my board, and he goes at 219. The third best wide receiver on the board as well, 21st overall. And it's just great value near the end of the draft, and you do get nice depth for that wide receiver position, which just lost DJ Chark, and you have JMO, who's suspended for the first 6 weeks. You just lost that one guy from Wisconsin. I really like that one dude from Wisconsin too, and now he's off the team. He didn't really have a good career with the Lions, to be fair, but nonetheless, good value in Antoine Green. Lions still get a C- in this draft. And then you move on to 15. Here's where I believe that a lot of people thought the Lions had like clear-cut worst in the NFC. These next 2 teams competed with worst draft, and it starts with 15th in the Dallas Cowboys. So Dallas also got a C- this year and came really close to being worse than the Lions, but they had better top picks. So it starts with Mozzie Smith, who was number 52 on my big board, went 26th. Third best interior defensive lineman on the board. Keep in mind, you still had Bryce and you still had Benton as well. And D-line wasn't your biggest need either. It was still necessary. You were going to end up taking it anyways, but not your biggest need at 26. And you still chose the third best on the board. And this pick might have, honestly, could have been better in round 2. And now I hear it was either down to Mozzie Smith or Matthew Bergeron. This would be a much better pick than Bergeron. So I'll let that information sit wherever. And then Luke Schoonmaker at 58 I hated this pick. Absolute reach in the 2nd round. My number 11 tight end, the 7th best tight end on the board up to this point. 5th round talent taken in the 2nd round. And when you go and who was available at tight end, Darnell Washington was there, Tucker Kraft was there, Zach Kuntz was there, Cameron Latu was there, and you still took Luke Schoonmaker, who I'm not high on whatsoever. I thought it was a terrible pick. And then you get a really good pick, though, out of DeMarvion Overshown. Heard they have plans to switch Overshown to safety. You get that linebacker-safety hybrid, which is good. I think Dallas will utilize that well. Now, noting that Micah Parsons is making a full transition to defensive end. Now that frees up a linebacker option, and there you can put Overshown. He was the 2nd best linebacker on the board up to this point. Only better one was Henry To'oTo'o. And yeah, so pretty good talent here in the 3rd. And then you get to a C-grade pick in Viliami Fehoko. I just thought it's a need. I'll give you that. But a little bit of a reach in the 4th round here for Fehoko. 207th on my big board. He went 129. Asim Richards was next, an A-plus pick. Again, you had an A-plus pick with Detroit, they got a C-, and an A-plus pick with Dallas, they got a C- as well. I love Asim Richards. He was 113th on my big board, 2nd best offensive tackle on the board. Only better one was Jalen Duncan to this point. And it's a fantastic elite depth selection, great value there too. And he might not have been the best offensive tackle on the board, and you're possibly going to play him on the interior O-line now as well. So good versatility there. We'll see what Dallas decides to do with him. And then Eric Scott. These next guys are C-grade. Next 3 guys. Eric Scott, good positional depth. There were better options available still. I had him at undrafted talent. Deuce Vaughn was on my big board at 224. They picked him at 212, but there were 9 better running backs up to this point, and I understand that Chris Vaughn or Deuce's dad had a lead scout for the Cowboys, but nonetheless, you really needed a Zeke replacement here, and not just like another Tony Pollard. Your Zeke replacement as of 212 could have been, Dwayne McBride would have actually been a pretty good replacement. Kenny McIntosh possibly. Zach Evans, I don't know if he would have been a good Zeke replacement. And even guys who went undrafted like Mo Ibrahim, Owen Wright out of Monmouth would have been nice. I don't even know if if he had a free agent deal, but nonetheless, you had better options from Deuce Vaughn and then Jalen Brooks. Getting getting that wide receiver depth in the 7th round that you were looking for all draft isn't great. So, he was undrafted though. So, with that being said, Dallas gets a C- grade. Almost loses to Detroit, but they're just slightly better. That's what appealed. And we stay in the NFC North now as we go on to a C grade Washington Commanders at rank number 14 in the NFC, 29th overall. I liked how they started their draft, but they just kind of were just from there, really. It started with Emmanuel Forbes, which I graded an A-. Christian, and the only reason is because I really liked the pick for positional need, but Christian Gonzalez was right there. Would have been a better pick there. I know I had Gonzalez and Witherspoon pretty much at 1A1 or 1A1B for corners, and you took Forbes over Gonzalez. Nonetheless, though, Forbes was still my 3rd favorite corner in this class. And then you kind of reach. I love Illinois. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Illini fan, but Quan Martin at 47 was a pretty big reach. I had him at 119 on my big board. He was the 2nd safety taken off the board, but he was my 10th favorite safety in this class. So he was a mid to late 4th round talent picked in the mid 2nd round. I just didn't see how Quan Martin is your 2nd best safety in this class. And then Ricky Stromberg, also a pretty solid reach, the 12th best interior offensive lineman available up to this point. The position is needed, but there were so many options here. If you're going for guard, you have Chandler Zavala. If you're going for center, you have Luke Weipler. And you have 10 more guys who are better than that. So I just really didn't like Ricky Stromberg at this selection. And then even then, C-, another C- selection in Braden Daniels. He was on my board, just barely on that board, just holding on. And another interior O-lineman pick. So here's kind of that guard tackle, possibly, maybe, depending where you place him. But if you place him at interior, again, 11 or 10 better interior O-lineman than Braden Daniels. And again, at least there's versatility to play on the outside. That's why this is a C-. And then you get back to the solid picks. KJ Henry kind of saves this draft for Washington. 120th on my big board. He's 2nd best edge on the board at this point. The only one that was better was Andre Carter, who went undrafted. And Chase Younger, Montez Sweat may be out of Washington. So you're getting very good support off the edge if that happens. And then the later round picks, round 6, 7. You have Chris Rodriguez out of Kentucky. You didn't really need him. Still good value and good support for Robinson. Pretty much plays like a power back almost. But Rodriguez is still a pretty solid pick here, I guess. Just not anything wowing me. And then an undrafted free agent talent in Andre Jones Jr. Still gets an okay grade. Nonetheless, it gets a C. Oh my goodness. You reorder these selections and it's elite. Just you didn't reorder these selections. I don't know. Quan Martin would have been the best at round 2, so I guess not. But I mean, KJ Henry in the 3rd, Ricky Stromberg in the 4th, Rodriguez in the 5th, Daniels 6th, Jones 7th would have been okay, I guess, but still not really anything eye-popping. So Washington gets a C. And then we continue on 28th, and so we got 31 was Detroit, 30 was Dallas, 29 was Washington, and another NFC team comes in at 28, and that is San Francisco. Not really high on their draft at all. Kind of unlucky they started the draft at 87, but nonetheless, still didn't start anything great with Jair Brown. 95th on my big board goes at pick 87. The only issue is that you picked your biggest need, but there are 4 better safeties, and those were Christopher Smith, Jordan Battle, Antonio Johnson, and Jamie Robinson were better. So Jair Brown here was a good positional need, a great positional need actually, but you had much better options. And then it just kind of, the front end just, no. You got Jake Moody, number one kicker on the board. And yeah, like this should have been the first kicker off, but I'm not sold on taking any special teams players until the 6th round. I just don't like any sort of special teams player touching the day 2, day 1 as well. I know we got some good guys out of that, like Sebastian Janikowski was a day 1 pick. I just hate day 1 and day 2 selections, let alone the first half of day 3. And then Cameron Latsu as well. You don't need a tight end. You have bigger depth needs, and you take tight end. You don't need it. I guess he's still the 3rd best tight end on the board up to this point. It's just a really weird selection because you don't need Latu. It gets better, though. Darrell Luter Jr., 161st on my big board, goes at 155, and there's 7 better options at corner, but you nailed it with what position you needed right here in the 5th round. Good value for Darrell Luter. He can play both corner and safety, and you need DB depth, as why you took Jair Brown. There you go. You got a good one, Darrell Luter as well. Then it kind of falls off a little bit. C- with Robert Beal Jr., pick 173. He's 212 on my big board. 33rd best edge rusher in this class, and there's 7 better edge rushers at this point. And the next best 7 were all undrafted. And what was it? You had if I'm gonna go back right here, you had Andre Carter, Iku Leota, Kayla Murphy, Brenton Cox, Ellie Gay, Thomas Incoom, and Lonnie Phelps were all on the board when Robert Beal went off. And I had all 7 of those guys on undrafted, but I had him as better grades than Beal. You still don't need edge depth. You just picked up Clellan Ferrell. Kerry Hyder is right there as well. And your starters are one of the best defenders in Nick Bosa and Drake Jackson, who you just picked in the 2nd round last year. So you don't need this pick right here. And then D. Winters was a good pick, though, at 216. 193 on my board, 5th best linebacker. Same as above, as in the top 4 left were all ended up going undrafted, but you still get fantastic value, and Winters could possibly win the starting job over Oren Burks. I don't like Burks, but you could possibly win that starting job over him. And then you get back to the really bad picks, and your only F pick in Braden Willis. He not only is this the 2nd tight end you selected, you don't need a tight end, and he's undrafted talent. That doesn't help. And then your next 2 picks were good. 253, Ronnie Bell, 2nd best wide receiver on the board, 19th overall, and you just get nice depth at slot receiver. Great value as well for the end of the draft. And then Jalen Graham, he might have been undrafted talent, but still really nailed it with your depth selection here. It's just the fact that the top of your draft was not good, and you didn't have a good pick until the 5th round. That's what gives San Francisco a C for this class. Moving on, at number 12, we have a C+ graded with Green Bay. A lot of people have Green Bay higher than this, but their top part of their draft was just horrendous. It got a lot better as time went on, but the top part was just really bad. 13 selections, and it started with Lucas Van Ness. I gave him a C+, 36th on my big board, 5th best edge available. And yeah, he's a really good fit for the Green Bay's 3-4, but Miles Murphy is literally a much better version of Lucas Van Ness, and you passed on Murphy to take Van Ness. So I don't know. This was just not a great pick. And then you go on to Luke Musgrave, and he's the 3rd best tight end on the board. Cool. But Darnell Washington is literally perfect at this selection for Green Bay. And Tucker Kraft, who they end up getting here in 2 more picks, was also better than Musgrave. But nonetheless, this just isn't a wild pick. It gets a C+. And then a D- in Jaden Reed, the 17th best wide receiver on the board up to this point. This was a massive reach at the position. And again, it's not an F because they do need the position. at least depth for the position, but I really don't like Jaden Reed in this draft. I don't see why you would take him this high. And then you get Tucker Kraft. So again, Darnell Washington is still there, and now this is your second tight end, but at least you took the best one that wasn't Darnell Washington, and he does match well with Musgrave. So I do like that selection nonetheless. And then you get an A-plus pick in Colby Wooden. He's number 54 on my big board, the best edge on the board, and he's literally a carbon copy of what Van Ness does. One of them is going to end up playing or going to have to play outside linebacker, but I still love the value with this pick. Potentially just absolutely buffing up your interior defensive line because you take Carl Brooks, which I'll explain in a second. Then one of the picks that absolutely made the littlest sense to me was Sean Clifford at 149. What? I'm confused with this pick. This pick's like, the pick makes literally no sense. I'm just going to go through the quarterbacks who I had better grades for than Sean Clifford, who were still available at 149. Tanner McKee, Jaron Hall, Todd Centio, Malik Cunningham, Aiden O'Connell was off the board, Max Duggan, DTR, Tyson Bagent, Adrian Martinez, and Tanner Morgan. I had better grades on all of them than I did Sean Clifford. This pick just makes absolutely no sense. And then Dontavion Wicks. This was a good pick. I mean, you had 8 better receivers, but I just love the fact that they have picked 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. And then you had a terrible backup QB, but that's good. That's what you had on offense. And then you take Carl Brooks, which was an A+, simply because you're getting him at pick 179 when he's number 68 on my big board. Best interior D lineman on the board. He can work as a D-end or DT, depending on where Green Bay wants to utilize him. But let's just say Lucas Van Ness plays outside linebacker. You now have, you can either have Colby Wooden at left D-end or right D-end, and the other one being filled by Carl Brooks. Or you can play Carl Brooks on the inside. So I think this was just fantastic value and flexibility for this selection. Anders Carlson comes out at 207. It's just kind of like he's not on my board, but nonetheless, it's an acceptable selection in round 6. I was talking about this earlier with Jake Moody. Excuse me. Carrington Valentine then at B+. He's not on my big board as well, but still good depth selection. You picked what position you needed. And somehow in the next 27 picks, you still have 3 more selections. And it starts with Lou Nichols, who is the worst of these 3. And he's the one all 3 of these guys are on my big board. But he's 255 on my big board. There's 10 better running backs. You have Sean Tucker, Keaton Mitchell, and even Kenny McIntosh could have been a selection here. And wait, what? Kenny McIntosh be a selection? Yeah, he was picked 2 picks later. So, I ended up having Israel Abanikanda at pick 175. So if they were to possibly invest in a running back earlier than pick number 235, potentially Dwayne McBride or even Evan Hull, Eric Gray if you jump the Giants. Nonetheless, I think you had better options here. And then Anthony Johnson Jr. gets a B+ because you have a hybrid DB that brings pretty good value for the selection. There's just 5 better options. And then you ended off with Grant Dubose out of, was he Charlotte? I had Dubose at 226 on my big board, the 7th best wide receiver available at this point. And he just has really good value at the end of this draft. And I actually wasn't expecting him to be drafted at all. So good selection here by Green Bay. They have a really good second half, but an awful first half, and that is why Green Bay gets a C+. Moving on, number 11 in the NFC, we have the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints start with Brian Bryce and Isaiah Foskey, who are the only 2 A-grade selections that they had in this class, and Bryce and Foskey actually were just I actually mocked both of them perfectly in my 7-round mock draft. I had Bryce at 29 and Foskey at 40. So I mocked these guys perfectly to where they end up going. But further out as prospects, Bryce's 16th on my big board. 3rd best interior defensive lineman overall, but the best available. And he's not an A+. I did have him at an A+ for a while, but I did end up going back to an A. as it's not a big wow pick, but it's easily the best pick you could have made here. And easily the best pick you could have made at 40 with Isaiah Foskey. The second best edge rusher on the board that's left, and the best one went off the next pick in BJ Ojulari at pick 41. And this is just another fantastic pick. Saints forefront is that it's just for this pick, it's perfect. Now you have Brian Bryce and Isaiah Foskey on that D line, along with Cameron Jordan. And I don't know who your fourth guy is at the top of my head, but nonetheless, I like the idea. I don't like the idea of Kendra Miller. 125th on my big board, going off at 71. There were 10 better running backs than Miller. And yeah, you did not need to take an RB3 this early. I know you have Alvin Kamara, who's might be in a little bit of trouble, but nonetheless, he's still there, and so is Jamal Williams. So I just didn't like this selection. And then you got Nick Saldiveri, who I gave a C-. 177th on my board, going off at 104, fifth best offensive tackle. They didn't need this selection, but the value of player kind of keeps us going up ish. Still a C- though, excuse me. Jake Haener then goes off at 127. He got a B-, even though he's 192 on my big board, and he's the fifth best quarterback. I really like the pick here for a backup QB. Pick at 146 for a backup QB would have been good too. But it wasn't near the best option. That was the issue. You have Tanner McKee, Jaron Hall, and Stetson Bennett went with the next selection. Those guys were all better selections than Jake Haener. Jordan Howden then got a D at pick 146 because he's an undrafted talent. There were better options and just an okay positional need. Surprisingly, I didn't give this an F. And then you end off the draft with A.T. Perry, wide receiver out of the Army. No, not Army. I don't know if he's Army. No, he's not Army. He's Vanderbilt. No, he's okay. Nonetheless, A.T. Perry, yeah, he's out of Wake Forest. God, I get these same colored schools mixed up all the time, so I apologize for that. But A.T. Perry still gets a C- because he's 238th on the board. There are 13 better options at wide receiver. Yeah, the depth need was there, but there were 13 better options. More predominantly, Xavier Hutchinson would have been an A+ selection here, and he ended up being A+ to the Houston Texans, I believe. So, nonetheless, I don't know. You had 13 better options, and you chose A.T. Perry. So the Saints had a really good start, and it kind of just got bombed down from there. So C+. Number 10, another team. This has been very mixed for a lot of different critics, and I'm just going to say it's Chicago. Chicago has been mixed because it really depends on where you view the D-line picks, and you don't view them well. So that's why I have Bears down in 23rd in the NFL and 10th in the NFC. It starts with Darnell Wright, who I believe was a pretty big reach simply because he might just be a right tackle. 28th on my big board, third best offensive tackle left. You still had Broderick Jones on the board, and you had Peter Skoronski, who I thought should have been the pick here at 10. I was. If you watch my stream, which is still uploaded on my YouTube channel, by the way, you will literally see me say as Chicago comes up, okay, Peter Skoronski here. You traded down with the Eagles and got your guy anyways with more compensation. You take Darnell Wright. So that's kind of what my thought process was there. And then Gervon Dexter. Here's where I had a problem with Chicago's draft strategy. They drafted 3 defensive tackles where all 3 of them were reaches, and you ignored defensive end. Gervon Dexter's where it started. He was the 7th best interior D lineman on the board, 12th overall, and such a reach in the second round. The next 3 off the board were, outside of Zach Pickens, were Byron Young, Kobe Turner, and Siaki Ika, who I had better. All 3 of them were better than Gervon Dexter. So you had a lot of options. You ended up taking Zach Pickens, who was even worse. You ignored D end unless you want to throw Gervon Dexter at D end. You ignored D end. Now you have the 9th best defensive tackle on the board, 15th overall. This was just such a big reach. He was a 6th round talent in my opinion, and he goes in the the first pick of the third round. So big reach there. It's still in need. So that's kind of where Chicago was with this draft, is like they needed basically everything. So you can't really have an F pick if an F pick in general. But in between those two picks, you had Tyreek Stevenson, who was an A grade, A minus to be specific. He was 50th on my big board, third best corner on the board as well, and he's a great fit for Chicago. The only early pick that I loved out of Chicago. And then passing, we just talked about Pickens. Starting in the fourth round, they started with Rashawn Johnson, who was a solid selection, third best running back on the board. It's a solid running back depth selection, but again, you need the end. You need more DB versatility / depth. Linebacker depth is somewhat needed at this point. O-line depth is still needed now. And you're going ahead and taking a backup, probably your third string running back to start his career. I didn't like it. But still gets a B minus for value. And then Tyler Scott comes off the board out of Cincinnati. He gets an A grade because he's such a speedy receiver. If Fields is going to want to rip the ball downfield, Tyler Scott's going to be perfect. 121 on my big board, the fifth best wide receiver available, 15th overall. And then Noah Sewell comes off also at an A grade, fourth best linebacker on the board. And it doesn't matter if there's three better. This is still just fantastic value. All four of those linebackers were fantastic value. And he was also 141st on my big board, went 148th. That's pretty similar right there as well. Terrell Smith then, for the last 3 picks were all pretty bad. Terrell Smith was not on my big board. And you needed a safety here for depth, not another corner, and he's undrafted talent as well. Now this is where I complain again. I hated the draft strategy that the Bears had because they took Travis Bell, who's just off the board, to be fair, but that's your third defensive tackle without a D end. So now you have Bell, who is just going to sit on the back of your bench. Then Kendall Williamson is also not on my board, but at least he's a hybrid cornerback safety, so he can play safety as well. Nonetheless, I gave the Bears a B minus because they had flashes of good selections, but their draft strategy just was not good for me. Continuing on, number 9 on my list is Atlanta. And Atlanta is very interesting depending on how you think of it. I have Bijan Robinson at a B plus grade, and that is because positional value there was not great, but Robinson is still an absolute generational talent at running back. Best prospects in Saquon, and Saquon went second overall, so he's number 4 on my big board as well. And Bijan just here again, not great positional need, but in terms of talent, he is one of the most talented players in this draft. So I love the pick in terms of talent. Just you had Algier as well, and you decided to go with Robinson. So with the positional selection, but good for terms of talent. And then you absolutely reach on Matthew Bergeron. 93rd on my big board, 8th offensive tackle on the board overall, and the third best available. And the reason I say this is because the offensive tackle class is very top heavy, and now you're going in and reaching for Bergeron, who, yeah, sure, he can play offensive guard as well, but you still have yet to pick defense, and defense is arguably a bigger need than another offensive lineman. Then you pick defense with your next 4 picks, or 3 picks. I can read my own font that I use for these texts, but you go, and all 3 of them, lo and behold, A grades. So you should have went with that originally. Zach Harrison starts it off, A minus. 81st on my big board, goes 75. 4th best edge on the board, and you had Colby Wooden, Andre Carter, and Dylan Horton, who I had as better talents. But Zach Harrison is still a pretty solid talent here for Atlanta. And then Clark Phillips is an A+. I just think Phillips was, with being 59th on my big board, is just extremely good value at 113. It's just you couldn't have made a better selection here because he was the best cornerback on the board, and he could be able to switch to safety. Speaking of safety, you go from round 4 to round 7, take DeMarco Hellams at safety out of Bama. This is the guy. This is safety who was sitting, who probably did not start. I think he didn't start. but because he had Branch and Battle. But third best safety on the board. It wasn't too necessary, noting that Phillips can play safety, but I do like the idea to take a safety here and potentially stick Phillips in the nickel. And then Jovan Gwynn was not a great pick. Not on my board, and there were a lot of better offensive linemen on the inside, but still solid positional value nonetheless. The Falcons end up getting a B and the ninth best team in the NFC. All right, we move on to the front half of this list, and we start with Carolina, who only had 5 selections as well with the first overall selection. And they did all right. I mean, could have been better. You can see that big black selection there, right there in the middle. I'll get into that in a moment, but we're going to start with Bryce Young. Number 3 on my big board, number 1 quarterback. Number 1 quarterback, of course, still left, and it's the first overall pick. So this is literally the only pick you could have made here to get a franchise QB at pick 1 in Bryce Young. But it doesn't get an A+ because you can't really get an A+ at when your pick at number 1 is so obvious. And then I want to talk a little bit about Jonathan Mingo at pick 39. He's number 82 on my big board, number 9 wide receiver overall, the 5th best wide receiver on the board. And I had Mingo's stock rising for a while, just like a lot of these other GMs did too. Did I have him anywhere close to this high? No. I don't think Mingo's worth a second-round selection. I had him at a late third, early fourth, or early to mid-third. He was a B-. So that would be, he was early to mid-third. Early to mid-third round selection for Jonathan Mingo, and he goes in the early second. I just think it was a bit of a reach. Okay positional value, don't get me wrong, but it was just too big of a reach. DJ Johnson. Now, this is a big F. My third worst selection in this draft. And he's not high on my board at all, and he ended up going 80th overall. He's not high on my board at all. He's not on my board. Undrafted talent. Positional value is there, but when you take an undrafted talent in the 3rd round, you're going to get an F. I'll hear you out for 4th and beyond. Then Chandler Zavala and Jamie Robinson both got A grades as well. 133rd on my big board for Zavala and 73rd on my board for Robinson. Zavala was the 3rd best interior lineman. Robinson was the 3rd best safety. Zavala was had good positional value. Jamie Robinson had good positional value. Both of them did have better options, but nonetheless, you're still getting really good value out of these 2 selections, and they both get A grades. So Carolina does get a B, despite having 3 A grade selections. They just had to go with a C- and an F to mix in with those. Number 7 is the team that had the most selections in the 2023 NFL Draft with the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, I had trouble fitting all these into one graphic, so I apologize, but their draft was up and down, and it started with the fact that Steve Avila went 36. He's number 91 on my big board, my 5th favorite interior O-lineman, and the 5th best, and he was the first O-lineman off the board, or first interior O-lineman off the board. But when you note that the Rams need a lot of good talent, noting why they had the most selections in the draft, you shouldn't have taken Avila when you had John Michael Schmitz on the board. You had Osiris Torrance on the board. Luke Weipler went in the 6th round, and you still passed up on him. So that's where I had my concern. I'll just say that. Byron Young then gets a B+ as the edge rusher Byron Young out of Tennessee. It was 114th on my big board, 18th best edge, and the 5th edge left. And it's good positional need and solid pickup. You just had 4 better options in the 3rd round is going to get you a B+. Still a solid pick, a very good pickup though, at pick 77. And then you make it even better with the A- grade of Kobe Turner. 104th on my big board, 9th best interior defensive lineman, 3rd available. This would have been a good pick at 77 as well. To be fair, you need almost everything, but still great value for a position of need. And that's where I get a little concerned, as I mentioned with the Bears, that when you need everything, you're probably not going to get an F because of positional need. And they still found a way to get 2. That was my concern, but they still did have a lot of A grades to balance that out. Stetson Bennett being one of them. He went, he was 159th on my big board, 8th best QB, 3rd best remaining. And it was either you pick up a free agent quarterback or you draft one. You did both of those, so good. Props to Los Angeles here. Today, actually, at the day of this recording, yesterday, if you're watching this right now, they picked up Brett Rypien. So good pickup for them there, and good job drafting Stetson Bennett as well. And then you get Nick Hampton, the first of 2 F selections here. I'll actually just talk about the 2 F selections real quick. Nick Hampton, undrafted free agent in the 5th round, and you already took Byron Young and even Kobe Turner on the inside. So you're not going to move either of them to the inside. And then you even have Davis Allen. You had no reason to select tight end when you don't need tight end depth. You have Higbee and Bryce and Hopkins are already solid enough. And you took tight end, especially when he's almost off the board altogether. So, and there were 5 better options. This was just an F pick. Sandwiched between the F picks, you had A- Warren McClendon, who was 127th on my board and went off at pick 174. The second best offensive tackle left, and number 1 was Jalen Duncan, who went 14 picks later, I want to say. And you could have had Jalen Duncan, so that is why it's not an A+ or an A, but nonetheless still a good pick out of McClendon. And then moving on, you have Puka Nakwa, I want to say that's how you say his name. I had him high on my big board. 14th, number 14 wide receiver, 4th best wide receiver on the board, 118th best player on the board, or 118th best player overall, not left. And the problem I had with this pick is it got an A- because it's elite value here at 177, but you still haven't selected a DB. And then magic happened. 5 picks later, they got to witness and take the fall of Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, A+ right there alone. The first of 3 A+ selections that the Rams made. He's 78th on my big board and went at 182. The best cornerback on the board, 13th best overall. And I'm just confused on how you got a 3rd round talent in the 6th round who just won the award for best DB in the country, and he fell to the 6th round. I get he's got size concerns, but he's still fantastic on the outside. So I just don't get how he fell all the way to the Rams here at 182. And then another 7 picks later, you make a not-so-good pick in Ochwan Mathis. Not on my big board. And just another edge. This is your 3rd edge rusher in this class. He almost made my big board. Don't get me wrong. It's just you picking another edge. I don't like that. Zach Evans, 76th on my big board, the 2nd best running back on the board. It's just your option. Your thing is are you gonna get? Or is this man gonna play RB2? He should, because he is good value. He's got 3rd round talent. Again, 2nd best running back available, and the only better one I had was Sean Tucker, who went undrafted. And it's just great value to get backup running back. 76th overall, goes down at 215. And then another A-grade pick with the punter Ethan Evans. Again, it's a respectable time to get a punter here. And Evans almost made my big board. I was just like, nah, I'm going to have Adam Korsak do it instead. And he didn't end up getting drafted. And then your 3rd A+ selection in Jason Taylor, the 2nd. I don't think he's related to the Jason Taylor we all know and love from the Dolphins. But 175th on my big board, 14th best safety, the 3rd best available at this point. And the reason he's an A+ is because he gives you elite value on both defense and special teams. You don't have a returner, now you do. So you're getting really good value out of pick number 175. And then it ends with Desjuan Johnson, your Mr. Irrelevant, who's not on my big board, but of course, the team with the most picks ends up getting Mr. Irrelevant as well, even though you didn't have a 1st round pick. And he's just off my big board too. So more cornerback depth would have been preferred here, but not a bad pick in Desjuan Johnson. With 14 selections, 3 A+ picks, and 2 Fs, the Rams get a B grade. All right, coming in at number 6 is Tampa Bay. So at Tampa Bay, they had 8 selections, very not inconsistent, but very just consistently finding ways to get like many different grades. It wasn't like A, D, it was A, B, C, D. So, but nonetheless, we start with Kalijah Cansey, who is a very good selection. I almost gave this an A+. He's 13 on my big board. Number 1 interior D lineman left on the board. Jalen Carter was the number 1. You just absolutely nailed your first overall, or not first overall, your first selection to get your speedy pass rusher, who now lines up beside Vea, who's a very physical run defender. So really like that pair up now on the inside. I think it's a very good fit for Cansey as well. Cody Mauch comes in at 48, B grade here for me. He was number 74 on my big board and went all the way up at 48. But he was the number 2 offensive tackle on the board. And even if you're looking for interior O-line, you have John Michael Schmitz and Osiris Torrance. DeJuan Jones would have been a better selection on the outside. But no matter where you put him, Mauch is still a good value selection for versatility. And he's still got a B grade, which is still very solid. There were just better options. An okay pick, though, comes in with the C+ grade of Yaya Diaby. 128th on my big board. The 8th best edge rusher left on the board. 22nd best overall. You just had better options here. That was the issue. Horton was on the board. KJ Henry was on the board. And Nick Herbig was on the board. Those guys all are guys who are going to be playing outside linebacker at the next level. So we'll see what they do with Yaya Diaby. If maybe they'll put him on the interior line and line him up with Vea and Cansey, but I doubt it. I think he just ends up playing depth at edge. And then you have Servokea Dennis. Sorry if I say that wrong, but number 191 on my big board. 15th best linebacker, 7th overall, or 15th overall, 7th best up to this point. And you're getting great value here in the 5th round. You need depth, especially if Devin White leaves, you get great depth here. So an A-grade pick nonetheless. Then it goes back to a C-grade pick with Payne Durham out of Purdue, I believe. 14th best tight end overall, 4th best on the board, 223rd overall. You just need bigger needs outside of that tight end depth, but it's not a bad pick. It's just not a good pick either. They're kind of like that average/mid pick. And then it goes to a D grade here. Their only D grade of the draft with Josh Hayes. He's not on my board, and it's just a bad pick. Here's your bad pick that Durham almost was, and it's basically if you take Durham but Durham is undrafted talent. That's basically what Hayes is. So you don't really need the DB depth at this point. You kind of need that wide receiver depth, which is what you get fantastically with an A-grade Trey Palmer. 144th on my board, 4th best wide receiver up to this point. It's just fantastic value in the back end of this draft. I absolutely love the upside that he brings as well. And then Jose Ramirez, undrafted free agent talent. You still solid positional value, but in the 6th round, you're getting undrafted talent. Edge rusher, it's a C- grade. So Tampa ends up getting a B+ in this draft. We now enter the top 5, which I mentioned in my AFC grades video that the top 5 were all A-grade teams. And it starts at the number 9 overall, and then it goes to number 8. And then it goes to number 7, and then it goes to number 6. So 4 straight NFC teams, 4 straight overall ranks, and it starts with Minnesota at number 5. Jordan Addison started off this draft, A- grade for me, 33rd on my big board, 4th best wide receiver, best available. And yeah, best wide receiver available, and it works well if Osborne plays in the slot. I don't think Addison is really good in the slot. And J-Jets it's just J-Jets. I don't think he's going to play in the slot. So, if Osborne wants to play in the slot, this will be a good selection in the end. Still gets an A-. And then Mekhi Blackman gets a C. And the thing is I thought I was high on Mekhi Blackman, and he ended up going right at the end of the 3rd round. So, the thing here is there were 12 better corners on the board, including Keely Ringo, Clark Phillips, and Travius Hodges-Tomlinson as well. That's the issue I had with Mekhi Blackmon going here at 102. He still gets a C grade, which is kind of, again, that mid-average grade. I just didn't like the pick. Then Jay Ward gets DB depth, and he's a better selection here at 134. Better value. He's a hybrid DB, so you can play corner or safety, and he just brings elite depth to that defensive back room. So he's just a fantastic hybrid guy. I like him here, A grade. Another A grade in Jaquelin Roy. Even better on my board, 122nd here, LSU teammate Jay Ward. The third best interior defensive lineman on the board and 10th overall. And you just have, it's good depth need and potential starter on the inside here for Minnesota. And then Jaren Hall at quarterback. Just like as I was saying with the Lions, I didn't like the fact that people were mocking the Lions to take a starting QB. I originally mocked the Vikings to get a starting quarterback as well, and now I'm like, I wouldn't have enjoyed that. Jaren Hall, actually the second best quarterback on the board up to this point, is a great idea to get a backup QB in there instead of a starter. McKee would have been better here. I have him as better on my board, as well as he kind of it's just him and Kirk Cousins are somewhat similar, except McKee's got better measurables, so that would have been a better pick. And the reason I have Dwayne McBride as a C at the end, despite him being the fifth best running back on the board, and going over 70 picks below where I have him on my big board, you have bigger needs. I don't care if Dalvin Cook leaves. You have bigger needs than running back depth at this position. So Minnesota does still get an A- nonetheless. They did have a pretty solid draft, just inconsistent when it comes to if it was a great pick or if it was an average pick. Now you move on to number 4. I have to swipe all the way over here. It goes to Seattle now. So Seattle, Devin Witherspoon started it, and this is already had me just shocked. Already Seattle's like, hey, we have Jalen Carter on the board, which would have been an A+, but there's also a bunch of these other good selections, aka Devin Witherspoon, a good selection. I was shocked to see him go that high, but in a really good way. He was number 12 on my big board, second best cornerback, and he was the first corner taken off the board. And I was not expecting this pick at all, but I still love it. I think Jalen Carter was your only A+ opportunity. You didn't take him, but you still got a good corner out of Devin Witherspoon. Then you got Jackson Smith and Jigba. 23rd on my big board. You have the second best wide receiver, and he's the first one taken off the board. So, again, another time picking first off the board that isn't the best, but still amazing value. You're lining him up now in the slot with DK and Lockett, and JSN was probably the best selection that they could have had at wide receiver, even though he wasn't the best available. And then Derek Hall at 37. He was actually 38 on my big board. I don't think I had a single pick in this draft where the pick was equal to where I had him on my big board. Derek Hall was one off. So Derek Hall, my 8th best edge, the number 3 on the board. And I love this scheme fits for Seattle, and he's only trailing Ojulari and Foskey for those top 2 edge rushers, and then Hall at 3rd. And I've seen a lot of people hate on this selection right here with Zach Charbonnet. I love it. B+ still. These guys are absolutely allergic to taking the best available guy on the board at that position. Charbonnet was the second best available on the board at this time. I had Spears at number 1. But still, amazing injury support. You now have your RB2, and if Kenneth Walker goes down, now you have Zach Charbonnet, who is still an NFL-worthy back. Kind of plays similarly to Kenneth Walker as well, if you can get him involved in the receiving game properly. And then it gets downhill. This is the reason why it was not an A, or an A+ for that matter. You now take Anthony Bradford, Cameron Young back-to-back, 2 just not-so-good selections. Anthony Bradford, undrafted talent, in my opinion. It's just positional value was there, but terrible talent value. You had a lot of better options at interior O-line. And then you even got Cameron Young, who was there were 6 better interior D linemen. You needed more starter than you needed depth. And if you took a guy like Carl Brooks or Jared Clark, who went undrafted, Maybe even Jaquelin Roy might even be a starter on that D-line, just not Cameron Young. And all three of those guys were available. Mike Morris, though, off the edge brings now versatility. He can play on the outside or on the inside, and he's just the second best edge rusher on the board at this point. Is probably going to end up playing on the inside, but he's still a good hybrid that brings great value to Seattle. And then Oluwatimi, a great run blocker. You're now helping out Kenneth Walker, and now your newly drafted Zach Charbonnet. Issue is you did draft Kenny McIntosh. I'll get to him in a moment, but still great value. He was the fourth best interior O-lineman available, but possibly the best run blocker available. And then your last two are just not really that good. Jarek Reed II, the safety. He was not on my big board, and good depth for positional value, but you had much better options at safety. Up to this point, if I'm going to scroll over here and find this out, if I can click on the right position, there we go. Where was this? At what? 198? DeMarco Hellams, Jason Taylor, Brandon Joseph, Ronnie Hickman, Kendall Smith, Trey Dean, Gervarius Owens, Brandon Hill, Kayvon Merriweather, Bennett Williams, Rashad Torrance, list goes on. Nonetheless, it's good, still good positional value, so that's why it's a C+. The C- is because it's not good positional value. You didn't need a second running back, even though Kenny McIntosh was a good value selection talent-wise there. Sixth best running back on the board, 214th overall, and he got picked at 237, but you have bigger needs than a second running back in this class. So the Seahawks get an A- still nonetheless, still had a really good draft, but it gets better. And these guys go 7, 6, and 4. So the top three were all in the AFC. Again, if you want to go check those out, go ahead. But we're going to start the top three NFC teams with the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Eagles, I have them at an A-. A lot of people have them at an A+. And the reason I have them at an A- is because of one selection, really. Actually two selections, I'd say. They had a lot of good A selections as well. And it starts with your A+ pick in Jalen Carter. He's number 2 on my big board. Number 1 interior D lineman. The number 1 remaining as well. And Jalen Carter, I understand. Off the field issues galore. If you think that that's going to affect them majorly, I completely understand that. But if we're ignoring the off-the-field issues, this is an elite steal at pick number 9. You now line him up alongside Jordan Davis, or he starts over Jordan Davis and line him up with Fletcher Cox until Cox retires. And overall, Jalen Carter has he's got so much talent. And he's got a Hall of Fame projection out of me. I relate him to Micah Parsons a lot, and that's where I think Jalen Carter stands. And then you take his Georgia teammate in Nolan Smith off the edge, number 27th on my board, number 2nd left at edge, number 5th overall at edge. And the only reason it wasn't A+ is because B.J. Ojulari would have been the better selection. I understand the Georgia connection, but it's not a wow pick with Nolan Smith, but you still get fantastic value nonetheless. After that, you got Tyler Steen, 168th on my big board. 7th best offensive tackle, 14th overall, a D+ grade. This is where things kind of fell. I was so hoping for the Eagles to get a good draft after they lost a bunch of people. They still did, but Tyler Steen definitely held them back. Good value. There's just 6 better options, and Tyler Steen, according to my big board, is 103 picks more or higher than where I had him on my big board. So, Tyler Steen, you had DeJuan Jones was on the board. Jalen Duncan was on the board. Blake Freeland was on the board. It's just Tyler Steen was not your best option, and not even close. Sidney Brown afterwards comes on, number 90 on my big board. The 5th best safety available up to this point, 6th best on the board. 4 better safeties. Those were the 4 that I mentioned earlier in Christopher Smith, Jordan Battle, Antonio Johnson, and Jamie Robinson. But it's still a good overall value. 90th on my big board to get him at 66. That's not bad by any means. It's just not great. So a B+ pick out of Sidney Brown. And then an A+ pick out of Keely Ringo. 41st on my big board, the best corner left. He fell all the way to the 4th round. He ends up reuniting again with all these Georgia teammates. So it's just an elite steal here as well. They stole Jalen Carter, and now they steal Keely Ringo. I'm loving this pick because the talent is there, the upside is there, and the positional need is there. So just an all-around amazing pick. And then Tanner McKee gets a C. He fell all the way to like the 13th QB taken, and the reason that he wasn't higher, even though he's my QB 6, is because he doesn't fit into Philly's scheme at all. You're now running through Jalen Hurts, and your backup, you brought in a perfect backup in Marcus Mariota. Tanner McKee literally plays like an old school quarterback, while Jalen Hurts and Mariota are these new school guys. I don't like this pick. I think McKee is a good quarterback. He's my QB 6, and he was a big steal in terms of talent. It's just Hurts and Mariota are their top 2 QBs. I don't think McKee's just going to stand alone in that QB room. And then Moro Ojomo, 174th on my big board. It's basically the same as Tanner McKee, except you have bigger needs at DT depth. You did have bigger needs outside of it, but DT depth is still somewhat there. And Ojomo's the 3rd best IDL left, so solid pick there. Philly overall gets an A-, and a lot of people had him at an A+, and they were there if I was high on Tyler Steen. Their NFC East counterparts actually came in at number 2 on my list in New York. New York Giants come in at number 2. They had 7 picks, including an F pick, but they had 2 A+, an A and an A-, and the top part, their day 1 and day 2 were just elite. And it starts with Deonte Banks. I thought an A+ pick would have been John Michael Schmitz here at pick 29. They got the second best corner on the board. The only better one was Joey Porter Jr. And I just thought Banks was perfect for New York here. Good selection nonetheless, need-wise and value-wise. Not the number 1 corner available. You could have gotten Joey Porter, but Deonte Banks is still good. I was talking about John Michael Schmitz, and then he suddenly falls all the way down to 57, and they get John Michael Schmitz. He turns into an A+ right there as well. One of the best picks in this entire draft. 25th on my big board, best interior offensive lineman, including the best available, of course. It's just absolute stud and a steal at pick 57. I wanted him to go at 25, as I said before. They still get him at 57 anyways, and they get their second A+ selection in day 2 with Jalen Hyatt. 45th on my big board. The 6th best wide receiver on the board, the best available. Just, again, absolute big steal, big positional value here. Good upside for New York as well if Danny Dimes can get his deep arm or his arm talent rolling. It's just you started off this draft so hot. I don't know what happened. Again, this is the reason they got an A- is because of this back half of the draft. Eric Gray is where it started to go down a little bit. He was still a C+, but he was 123rd on my big board, the 5th best running back available. The problem is you already have a good amount of running back depth behind Saquon. You had, of course, as I said, Saquon. You have Matt Breida, and you just picked up Gary Brightwell, who was a 6th-round pick. So in 2021, and he's had a pretty solid career up to the point as well. So I like Gary Brightwell. I think Eric Gray is the 4th-string running back. It's just you didn't need to take that. In round 5, round 6, you take Trey Hawkins the 3rd, not on my big board. There's so many good options at cornerback up to this point. Alex Austin would have been a blowout of the park. Instead, you gave him to Buffalo. And yeah, it's just there were better options. That's why cornerback here was a D pick, even though it's positional need. An F pick, though, is Jordan Riley. Riley is not on my board. He's even worse than Hawkins. He's not really close to my board, and the need isn't needing right now. You don't need interior D-line right now. I don't know why I had to take it. And then Gervarius Owens at 254. He was 248 on my big board, 8th best safety. It's just, again, great DB depth value, even though there were 7 better options. And the reason it still got an A- is because they were all somewhat close to each other. Plus, the draft is basically over. I'll give you that advantage. Nonetheless, New York Giants come in as the second best NFC team. But there was one better NFC team this year, ended up being the fourth best draft, just shy of an A+. The three A pluses were all AFC. And your best NFC team this year is the Arizona Cardinals. And flash already that B grade as the first pick. And I want to explain, the draft strategy to get this was actually really nice. It's just you could have been at number 12 and picked Broderick Jones. You take Paris Johnson Jr. instead. My number 3 offensive tackle, 20th on the board. Again, I don't agree with how you traded up to get him, but the strategy to be able to get good compensation out of it was still good anyways, and Broderick just would have been better at 12. Still, positional-wise, fantastic selection. And then you got an A+ with BJ Ojulari. He's number 18 on my big board. The number 4 edge in this class, the best edge available. I think it was like the 8th edge taken off the board. And it's just an elite all-around selection. You got versatility possibly, depending on, I know you got a new defensive coordinator if you play 3-4 or 4-3. Doesn't matter. BJ Ojulari is there to play off the edge. He's got fantastic positional value here as well as talent value. So just A+ was sitting right there for me to give. And then Garrett Williams gets an A grade as well. The second best cornerback on the board up to this point. The only better one was Keely Ringo. He was 56th on my big board. I don't know. There was great positional value, and there's hybrid potential as well. Garrett Williams may as well replace Budda Baker if you let him go. I don't know. I like Garrett Williams. He's got fantastic tackling abilities. I think he's gonna do great things as a hybrid defensive back. Then it kind of gets a little bit iffy as Michael Wilson was the 19th best wide receiver. Yeah, it's a good idea to get a rotational wideout, but there are 18 better options, and that just makes us a big reach. But because a lot of these wide receivers were somewhat close together once you got to 94, it's a C+. Then your undrafted talent in the 4th round with John Gaines II. Yeah, he barely missed my big board. Cool. But it's not good getting an undrafted free agent talent in the 4th round. At least positional need is there. And then you got Clayton Tune, an A- grade at quarterback. I really like the idea to get a reliable backup. You have Colt McCoy just for probably a year or two, and then he's gone. And Clayton Tune, the 3rd best quarterback on the board. You have bigger needs, but he's still a good pick at backup quarterback. And then you got Owen Papo, another A- selection. Arizona absolutely loves taking inside linebackers in the draft, taking inside linebackers in free agency. They love it. But at least you got the number 1 inside linebacker available in Owen Papo. Athletic freak, by the way. So you're getting a versatile option here at linebacker, Arizona. So he might be inside linebacker on paper, but possibly watch for him to be just like Isaiah Simmons and play versatile anywhere he pretty much wants. And then 2 picks remaining. You have another A grade selection in Keitrell Clark. He was 131st on my big board, 18th best corner, 4th best corner left on the board. And it's just great value for more defensive back depth, which I was hoping they would stack up on that because they've had really bad defensive backs for a while now outside of Budda Baker. So I like more DB depth here. You just could have gotten a better one earlier, like we'll pick 139. You could have gotten, I can go back to my big board here. At 139, you could have gotten Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, or you could have gotten Hodges-Tomlinson at that pick too, but Cubu Kelly could have been a better selection at 139. Even if you want to jump all the way up to 94, Clark Phillips, Keely Ringo would have been good selections at DB depth as well. And then he ended off with Dante Stills, just off my big board. He's an undrafted talent though, and again, not the biggest positional need, and he's an undrafted free agent, but it's not a terrible pick by any means since he just missed the board. So C+ there. Arizona Cardinals get an A grade, and that is where the positional rankings are going to end. So I really do appreciate you guys for tuning in to these last 2 videos. Again, I really apologize for the length of the last couple of videos. I promise next series coming along, it's definitely going to be a different a different kind of length. We're kind of going to be getting back into our 15 to 20 minute, maybe even 30-minute videos, just like the ranking ones were. So please stay tuned for those. But outside of that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Without further ado, I'm Chase Keller from Chase Keller Journalism, and thank you guys so much for choosing this channel as your source of sports coverage. I'll see you guys in the next video.